So that was just my first take. That wasn't real. So hi, I'm Neil Lichter. I'm a program director at Pathfinders for Autism. Welcome. While you're coming in, please mute your microphones. We're going to have a great presentation today with Brittany Rader from Behavioral Framework. Brittany's the Vice President of Clinical Services there. And Behavioral Framework is an in-home ABA provider that's in Maryland and Virginia. Brittany began her career as a behavior technician, implementing ABA strategies to improve the lives of individuals with autism spectrum disorder. After earning her BCBA, she went on to work in a variety of settings: public schools, private schools, homes, clinics, with a variety of populations such as autism, intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, mood disorders, deaf, hard of hearing community, and the blind community. Most of her work has focused on these populations using the principles of ABA and designing quality comprehensive programming to ensure the individuals served are able to reach their maximum potential. So we've already scheduled her for a part 2 that's going to be in January. So we're going to put the registration link up for that. I also want to mention we have a resource fair coming up on December 2nd. We're going to put the links up for that as well. Brittany, whenever you're ready, go ahead and get started. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. All right. First, thank you, Neil and Pathfinders, for giving me the opportunity to be able to present on this topic. It's a really exciting topic to talk about. Clearly, there is a large interest and it's a large area of need that we come across with our population. So I'm really happy to share some of the things that we know and the strategies that we use that we have found to be effective in working with individuals with ASD. So you all know why you're here today. This is the description. The purpose of today is really just to walk through the skills associated with toilet training, how to break down those skills, how to identify what are critical steps that may need to be taught first prior to even starting your toilet training protocol, and then how to use those things to develop a plan that's individualized for the individual that you're working with. And that's going to impact, or these strategies are going to apply to any kid at any age, whether they're 12 months, 17 years, 35 years, 60 years old. So what to expect today? Some of the things that we're going to talk through in this training is identifying why it's difficult for individuals diagnosed with ASD to become toilet trained at a typical age. I'm going to do a brief overview of history associated with toilet training and associated research. I'm going to talk through how to identify ways to make the individual become a willing participant of the toilet training process at any age. I think one of the biggest barriers are just how difficult this can be for implementers, technicians, therapists, analysts, caregivers. And so we kind of tend to throw in the towel early because we have a good way to get us started. So I want to spend a lot of time talking through how to build tolerance with this, how to make the individual a willing participant to increase effectiveness. We're going to identify critical components that are going that should be part of your effective toilet training protocol at any age. And then at the end, we'll review recommendations and strategies so that you hopefully walk away with tools to create your own individualized toilet training plan to begin with your child, your client at any age. So what not to expect. I want to make sure we're transparent and real with the purpose of today's training and what you guys should expect, because I know toilet training is a really big topic and we already had a lot of questions about different aspects of toilet training that unfortunately are not going to be included. And it's just because teaching the steps to urinate independently in the toilet to begin with, I could take 2 to 3 hours on this training. So I want to make sure we're talking about just priority number 1, goal number 1. So what not to expect today is an intensive lit review or common references to research. For those of you that are interested, analysts, parents, I do have references at the end and I do have some references throughout, but I'm not going to be spending a ton of time on in-depth lit reviews. It's not going to be a quick solutions or train your child in these 7 easy steps. I think that is going to be one of the barriers we talk through, is that these plans don't always apply to our population. There's not going to be unique strategies, unfortunately, for teens or young adults. You're going to see that just like anything else with good behavior principles, good behavior strategies, the components are going to be consistent with just slight variations based on age and history and experience with toilet training. And then last, we're not going to have a focus on bowel movement training, nighttime toilet training, or wiping techniques during this particular training. Why we're not doing that is we know that effective toilet training programs take time and patience and often requires a reduction of problem behavior and teaching of prerequisite skills before you can even begin the process. These strategies and components of effective toilet training programs are similar for children, teens, adults with slight variations, like I said, and we'll hopefully talk through those variations if you're a caregiver or a technician or analyst for an individual that's in their teens, young adulthood, things like that. Toilet training programs should be individualized to your client or child. Sometimes I think that we separate toilet training or activities of daily living and don't look at it as just any other skill that we are trying to teach that requires a individualized intervention and an individualized protocol. Consistency is key. Like any intervention, it's going to require time and review of what the individual can do or not do to help you determine if your plan is actually going to work. And then last, bowel movements, nighttime toilet training, and wiping are more difficult skills. So we kind of put those in our teach these later pile, and those should come later. So this training is not going to focus on that. It's going to teach you how to prioritize or hopefully prioritize each step of the process. However, we did get a lot of questions, inquiries about these topics. So there will be a part 2 in January that will focus on those things. So to begin, let's talk about what we know about toilet training. We know it's an important skill. Whether you're typically developing, individual with a disability, it's clearly an important skill. Toilet training, along with communication and little to no problem behavior, are critical to the quality of life and independence for the individuals that we serve and the caregivers that are with them every day of their life. Toilet training is a skill that has multiple components, and oftentimes we forget how many components and domains are associated with toilet training, but we need to know that going into this. We need to know that it has multiple components. We know even typically developing kids have difficulties with toilet training. I know some individuals that have their children toilet trained at 18 months old, and then I know some that haven't even started until the child is 3. So we have to know that even typically developing kids have different levels and different times in their life that they begin the toilet training process. But most importantly, we know that our population already falls well below the norm across a variety of domains. So it's really important, and we'll talk through when you get started. It's really important to recognize that we're already kind of dealing with some deficits to begin with. And so when and how you get started is so important. Not toilet trained is going to really prevent the individual living in the least restrictive setting. Whether it's an elementary age child that is potentially impacted because they're not toilet trained, so they can't access the general education setting, or you're a teen or young adult who needs additional support or limited locations that they can go for their work placement because of lack of being toilet trained, it's going to have an impact, a lifelong impact, if this individual is not toilet trained. And last, toilet training is really stressful. When we talk through all of the components and parts of what you need to do to build a long-lasting, effective plan, you're going to realize that it's going to take a lot of work. And there may be participants in the audience that are in a position where they've already tried toilet training and haven't gotten anywhere, and it already is stressful to them. But the more difficult it is, the harder it is to successfully implement this plan with fidelity. So if you have a plan that you're constantly hitting failure after failure, you're going to be quick to throw in the towel. The individual is going to be quick to get frustrated, and then you don't get anywhere. So the purpose of today is to help you not get to that place. So talking through some of the barriers to success more specifically, one of the barriers that we encounter often is individuals starting too late or thinking that you're even starting too early. So oftentimes the thought process or approach is, if I wait until my child is 5 or 6, they're going to be older, they're going to have more language, they're going to understand better. And the reality is, just like any good intervention for our population, the longer you wait, the worse things can get, or the harder the things can be. And this is exactly the same. This falls into that category. Another thing is thinking you're starting too early. I'll talk through ways that you can get started with even a 12-month-old. Another barrier is just a lack of understanding of how to break down and teach these toileting skills. The individual demonstrates way too many problem behaviors, including bathroom avoidance, and you're not taking the time to actually target those things before you even begin the process, or using a plan that isn't individualized to your child or client. So like I said, referring back to get your child trained in these 7 easy steps, I think some of those components are good, but like anything else, it has to be individualized. I think lack of success really leads to frustration. And it's going to cause you to change your strategies or protocols too soon. And then prioritizing the wrong skills or including too complex of components can also be barriers to success. So our objective today is to provide you with the tools necessary to create an individualized and effective toilet training intervention that can be used with your child or client at any age to build success with toilet training. So you may not walk away with a plan that is going to get your child totally independent, but hopefully you'll walk away with a place that you can get started to start building smaller levels of success. A quick review of research for analysts that are interested, for parents that are interested. I do think this gives you some context and some norms to think about when we go through these things. So a quick review of research. It's one of the most frequently looked up self-help skills. From the lit review I did in preparation for this training, I came across a 2013 survey. It looked at 208 individuals with a primary diagnosis of ASD, 2 to 21. And it found that 49% of those individuals were not yet toilet trained. And those that were didn't become toilet trained until 3.5 or 4.5 years old. Most surprisingly, all of those that were toilet trained took over 1 year. Early models rely on really short but intensive interventions, and they're often paired with therapeutic support to maximize outcomes, meaning they have access to an analyst, a clinician, a physician, technicians to help implement these protocols. Azrin and Fox were one of the first. They pioneered the intensive toilet training protocol, which I'll do a quick overview later in this training so you know the difference. And a lot of the research is just replications of this particular study. And published studies show slight variations in applied strategies, but I'll state, like anything else, that more research is needed. So for what I gathered personally is that a lot of these studies had these rules, hard, fast rules, without much room for flexibility or even consideration of environment or lack of access to therapeutic care. Few studies directly deal with barriers, especially in school settings, which are really difficult because I think we all know that most often there are barriers that we have to navigate. And last, few studies had limited direct therapeutic care, meaning few studies did not have access to analysts, clinicians, et cetera, that helped carry over these plans, help train those implementing, help support caregivers. So that's really important to know, is that a lot of these things that have been effective or show these like strong levels of efficacy have a lot of therapeutic support. So for parents out there that are doing this on their own, know that if you're missing this piece, don't be frustrated, don't be upset, don't be down on yourself. It's a huge component. So what is success? Just so we have an idea or kind of like a norm to reference when we talk through this. Blum published a study, and for our population, defined success as when a child has less than 4 accidents per week. And that 98% of those individuals meet this criterion by their 3rd birthday. So when I say this, like most things I'm going to say throughout this training, is proceed with caution, because success is different for every individual. Overall success has to be broken down into these smaller achievable steps. And the initial plan that you create, whether it's today, a week from now, a month from now, may look really different than what actually got you to your end results. And that's okay. That means that you're using these tools and you're figuring out what's working and not working, and you're adjusting along the way, and you're not running into these barriers and viewing them as roadblocks. And last is, don't limit the individual's potential or your ability to commit to a plan by holding on to these standards. So if you look at this age and say that, most kids are toilet trained by 3 years old, and you've got a 17, 18-year-old, don't look at this and say, I'm stuck, I shouldn't even begin. I'm out of luck, my child is not going to be toilet trained. It's just not true. So where do you begin? We kind of started with a background. We talked through some barriers. The following slides are just going to break down each of the components of where to begin to develop an individualized toilet training protocol, as well as modifications so that you can create a unique plan. So one of the things that we're going to talk through initially is becoming familiar with the skills associated with toileting. So breaking down the different domains, talking through associated skills, knowing that these skills can either occur in isolation or simultaneously. We're going to talk through considerations for the individual's age. Like I said, this should apply to a 12-month-old. It should apply to a 35-year-old. So we're just going to talk through considerations that you may make depending on the individual's age. We're going to figure out ways to understand what the individual can and cannot do. That is the most critical piece before beginning any toilet training protocol, so that you know what are skills that I need to teach before I even start having my learner, my child, my client sitting on the toilet and trying to urinate in the toilet, versus what are things that can probably just be incorporated into the plan. And last, we're going to piece that all together so that you hopefully have the tools to develop an individual plan that is flexible so that you can adjust based on how your child or your client is responding. So when we talk about all of this, what does that mean? There are domains associated with toileting skills, and I've broken them down across 4 different categories. This is not research-based. This is just something based on my own personal experience and lit reviews and just knowing the skills associated with toilet training. These are the domains that I think you can look at in helping to identify what the individual can and cannot do, and understand all of the skills involved. So language, what the individual can express and understand. Behavior, so are there problem behaviors that you have to manage, such as fears or avoidance with the bathroom? Do you have compliance with the individual? Does the individual have this extreme need for sameness or difficulties with generalization? Physical, meaning does the individual have underlying medical conditions? Really, that has the most impact when you have to look at increasing fluid intake or potentially changing diet when you're working on bowel movement training. And then last is gross motor planning. So when I reference that, I talk about ability to physically take their pants off and on, underwear off and on, or just the motor planning of being able to execute all of these steps in the sequence. So breaking down language a bit more in looking at skills associated with toilet training. Receptive skills are the most often used, especially during initial phases, regardless of age. I think that oftentimes parents or practitioners get stuck with this expectation that the individual should immediately request when they want to go to the bathroom or label when they're wet. And I just encourage you to proceed with caution with that, because if you don't have a fluent communicator, if they're not good at requesting their basic wants and needs, having this expectation from the beginning is just going to make the actual process more difficult. You're increasing the response effort for the individual. It's already hard enough. And so you may create these barriers that you're going to have to navigate eventually by adding this component in too early. But you can use the individual's language level to your benefit. So for example, if you have an individual that can vocalize, can discriminate, you have opportunities to teach wet versus dry prior to beginning toilet training. So that way you can include dry checks in your toilet training protocol. Oftentimes we include things that the individual doesn't even have the skills to understand. And so that becomes a barrier. So you have to know what your learner or child can and cannot do in terms of their language, so you know exactly what to include in your protocol. Knowing their language level is also going to help you as the implementer identify what language you're going to use and what phrases, directions, things that you're going to provide. So for example, a 3-year-old language that you use during the toilet training protocol for a 3-year-old is going to look really different from a 17 or 18-year-old. You know, with a 3-year-old, you're going to use words like potty and pee-pee. And with a 17-year-old, you're probably going to use toilet, pee, bathroom. But consistency is key. So you have to understand the age and the language level of the learner. And you want to keep it simple, but you want to make sure that your language is appropriate, especially for older individuals. If they're in high school, accessing work settings, you want to make sure you're using language that they're going to come across and experience with other individuals. The next domain that you want to consider and know the skills for is behavior. And This actually probably should have come before language because I think it just has such a higher level of importance. But when I talk about behavior, you have to ask yourself and look at the individual and see if they're able to do certain things. So for example, does the individual comply with simple directions? Do you have instructional control? Meaning, is the individual likely to respond to you? They may not do it correctly, but are they likely to respond to you when you give them specific directions? Can they tolerate even sitting for extended periods of time? Oftentimes, toilet training protocols require somebody to sit on the toilet for 5, 15, even up to 30 minutes at a time. So if you have an individual that hasn't gotten there yet, that's something you're going to want to file as this needs to be taught before I even begin, because it's only going to maximize success with my protocol. Fears and avoidance. I'm actually going to take some time to talk through fear and avoidance behaviors more because it's something we see often, especially with our younger population. We get a lot of feedback from parents that anytime they even say the word bathroom or potty, the child immediately has a tantrum or runs out of the room or starts to cry. And so we really want to make sure we tackle those behaviors first so that it becomes a positive experience and less stressful for everybody involved. And then last is just the sensitivities to the bathroom. You may have an individual that doesn't like the sound of the toilet flushing or the fan in the bathroom. And so you're going to have to know and understand those things. Physical. I'm not going to speak too much to this. This is my seek medical consultation slide. You may have an individual that has underlying medical conditions, like I said, that can impact, especially when you do intensive toilet training, increasing fluid intake. You need to make sure that there are no underlying medical conditions that would be impacted by this fluid intake, or changing a diet when you're working on bowel movement training. All of these things you're going to want to consult with your medical professional if you are including those in the components of your plan. And last is the gross motor planning. So I think, like the expressive language component of the individual requesting for the bathroom or labeling that they've had an accident, this is one of those things that I think sometimes gets added too early to protocols, and it makes things more difficult, and then it becomes a barrier to success. So I think that what you need to know as an implementer, as a therapist, analyst, parent, is if the individual can do these things, such as pulling up their pants, pulling down their pants, pulling up their underwear, pulling down their underwear, of course you want to include those in the plan. However, if it's not something that they're able to do, they still require teaching, perhaps consultation from an OT, I would not worry about adding it into the plan. Those are things that should come later and should come as soon as possible, but don't get caught up in creating all of these additional expectations when your only goal is, how do I get this individual to urinate in the toilet on their own? We know that they can't do it totally on their own if they can't pull up their pants and pull down their pants, but it's a component of the skill that is more complex that we recommend adding later. And then you also need to be mindful. We've got some learners, especially older learners, that we know that they just need written cues, written directions that help them navigate or get through their day-to-day life. And so if that's your child, if that's your learner, you should know that and be okay with that and have those things in place from the beginning. So we've talked about the different domains, and now I want to talk about how you use the individual's age in identifying what your toilet training protocol is going to look like. One of the things I want to talk through is where or when do you even begin or restart the process? You're going to be probably surprised to hear that you can start as early as 12 months. And it's recommended that you start as early as 12 months. And I don't mean an intensive toilet training protocol or a structured protocol. I mean just building routine. I have a child. He turns 2 in January. He's a typically developing child. And at about 14 months of age, we started having him sit on the toilet right before his bath time. And he had no idea what we were doing or the reason for it. And he thought the water in the toilet was cool. And he started playing with it, and it was a mess. But we put it in as part of his routine. And eventually he became more consistent. And I would do a quick 10-second countdown. Literally the 10 seconds were like 3 seconds. And it just became part of the routine. And oftentimes, if we were rushing through bath time routines, skipping toothbrushing, skipping toileting, he would run and grab his potty seat and put it on the toilet. So we were like, okay, great, we've established something. So as early as 12 months, you can get started building these routines. Like I said before, I think the idea that if you wait a little bit longer, to start the process because the individual is going to be older, or they may have more skills or less problem behavior is unfortunately just not true. You have to figure out, what is going on in that individual's life that is impacting you getting started, and start working on decreasing some of those barriers so that you can actually begin a toilet training protocol. I think that another thing that's important to note is that the newly diagnosed period is not ideal to do something like this. So if there are viewers of this webinar that have a child or are working with a family that has just received a recent diagnosis, now is just not the time to do it. You're going to want to figure out when you're going to do it, but because of the effort and energy required into really implementing an effective toilet training protocol, you're going to want to wait until you have some other things figured out first. And then the last piece in consideration with the individual's age is just the type of language you're going to use. And I referenced that before. Your language for a 3-year-old should be very different from the language that you use with a 17, 18, even 30-year-old. And you're just going to need to know and have that in your plan from the beginning. So you've become more familiar with the skills associated, and I probably missed a bunch. I probably could go forever and ever about all of the different skills associated with toilet training, but at least you have a general idea of things that you need to consider. And so you have this idea of things that you need to consider, but then you need to figure out exactly what the individual can and cannot do. So my best recommendation is using checklists. AVB Press, which is associated with the VB-MAP, has a great checklist. There's a reference at the end of this training for Brazelton, who published a checklist that was developed by pediatricians. This screenshot is something that we use internally, that we created just based on our own personal experience, and referencing some of the studies out there. But checklists, like any other assessment, are going to be really helpful in helping you identify what your individual can and cannot do. And then from there, you need to figure out, what are my critical prerequisite skills? So what are the things that I've got to take time to teach first outside of the bathroom before I even get started, so that I can set my child or individual up for success. So these checklists are going to be really beneficial in helping you identify those things. So you can see here some of the initial things that we look at, that we referenced before, is, does the client follow simple instructions? Are they aware of being wet or show discomfort when they're wet? All of that information is going to be helpful for you. It's going to be used as a tool to determine what's going to go in your plan and what's not. So assuming you've identified a checklist that works for you, and you've identified what your child or learner can and cannot do. So now what? Where do you go next? You always want to make sure you're starting by targeting these critical prerequisite skills. Some of the most commonly targeted, that I would like to spend some time talking about, that are really going to set you and the individual up for success, is the individual able to follow simple directions? Sit down, stand up, come here. Are they following instructions to transition to non-preferred locations? Are they able to sit for up to 5 minutes without problem behavior? Do they have tolerance with actually going into the bathroom and sitting on the toilet? These things, I would say, more so than anything, you want to make sure the individual can do. And if they can't, you really want to take the time to teach outside of the bathroom, so that way you are setting yourself and the learner up for success when you actually begin your toilet training protocol. I want to talk a bit more on tolerance, because I think that this is something that even within our agency, we focus a lot on, because we get a lot of feedback from caregivers on just their child's ability to even comply with simple requests, or when you ask them to go to the bathroom, whether it's in the community or at home, what does the child do? What does the individual do? So when I talk about tolerance, I mean the ability for the individual to comply with the request to transition to the bathroom and sit on the toilet without any problem behavior. So no other expectations, no expectation to urinate in the toilet, no expectation to wash hands, pull pants up, pants down. Just, can they complete the basic critical components of that routine? It's such an important step that often gets bypassed. So it's highly encouraged that you take some time just working on transitions to the bathroom and sitting for brief periods of time without the expectation to void. So what that may look like is on a schedule. Doesn't need to be often, doesn't need to be every 15 minutes. It could be once an hour. you're giving the individual their cue, their instruction. So time to potty, or time to go to the bathroom, or you need to pee, whatever your cue is. And working on just the transition to the bathroom, supporting the steps that they can't do. So if they can't pull their pants down, you're helping them. If they can't pull their underwear down or their pull up or their diaper, you're helping them. And they sit on the toilet for a brief period of time. And when I say brief, I mean you may start at 5 seconds and then build to 10 seconds. Ideally, once you get to a place where you're at up to about 2 minutes, you're probably in a better place. Probably not good enough if that's all you're getting to. That's going to require some additional teaching. But 2 minutes with the expectation of just following this instruction to transition, sitting without problem behavior, and exiting the bathroom without any challenges. You're still going to want to use reinforcement during this time. You're going to want to reinforce the transition. You're going to want to reinforce the sitting. You're going to want to reinforce the problem behavior. So reinforcement is still going to be the same. It has to be there. But taking time to focus on this is really what is going to help you make the individual a willing participant in the toilet training process. So again, no expectations, no expectation to avoid, no expectation to wash hands. Don't make it too fancy. Don't make it too complex. Keep it really simple and just work on compliance with this transition. And throughout the whole protocol, as you're teaching the individual to urinate in the toilet, remember that you're never going to ask them, do you need to use the bathroom when you're giving your cue? Because if you were asking them, they should be in a position where they're actually independently toileting and able to identify. And they're not there yet if you're at this point of the protocol. So make sure that your cue is an actual directive, not a request or a question. So how do we put this all together? You've got some background information. You understand the need for a more comprehensive plan and that it's not quick and simple. And to maximize success, you've really got to take the time to identify a lot of the things that we've talked through. So how do we put all of this information to create this individualized plan? So we talked a lot about prerequisite skills. Such a critical component. Take the time to identify the prerequisite skills and then file them as skills I need to teach before we even start, skills that I can embed early on in the protocol, and skills that are just going to come later. The next is you're going to make sure that you have your reinforcers. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about reinforcers or different reinforcers. What I will emphasize is you need to make sure that they are things that you only use for toileting. I think a lot of analysts or technicians or therapists know exactly what I'm talking about when I reference this. They should only be used for toileting. It's only going to maximize your success. Most often, food is used as a reinforcer, and the iPad is used as a reinforcer. And I know that there are probably a lot of varying opinions out there on that. But I think the reality is, like, even as adults, there's probably been a time or two where you brought your phone into the bathroom with you. So you got to be okay with knowing what it's going to take to get that individual to sit on the toilet for extended periods of time, because your ultimate goal is this independence and quality of life. And if an iPad is a fruit snack is going to get you there, like, let's be practical and be okay with it. The next thing is creating your individualized protocol. And these next few slides are going to talk through the major components of a toilet training protocol and actual protocol. So once you've gotten past this pre-teaching phase, and the different ways to modify. And then I'm going to give you some examples of protocols for different ages. So when you're looking at how to create your individualized protocol, I think the most important thing to remember is that the first 2 weeks are going to really determine the outcome of your plan or how effective your plan is going to be. And so when I say that, I say, just like anything else, you've got to give the plan time. You've got to give it time. You've got to give the individual, your client, your child, time to respond to the different types of intervention strategies you created. And you need to know that you've got to let it run its course for a little bit before making any changes. But some of the major components are, number one, identifying how often the individual is being taken to the bathroom. So what is the schedule? Sometimes it may be easy if you've got in-home service providers. They can certainly take data for you on how often the individual is urinating in their diaper or underwear. Sometimes it's hard to tell with younger kids that are in diapers because it seems like every time you change their diaper, it's wet. So that's okay. Just start with a small interval. An example of a small interval would be 15 minutes off the toilet, 15 minutes sitting on the toilet, and work your way up. With this schedule, there always has to be a cue. So what is going to signal to the individual that it's time to go to the bathroom? So we can't just identify the schedule and assume that the individual is going to know that they're on a 30-minute schedule. You need to have a cue. So if you've got younger learners, it might just be the caregiver, the implementer using a timer, and they respond to the timer. It may be a potty watch if you've got an elementary age kid. If you've got a high school or young adult, you may have an app that's downloaded on their iPhone at your set interval. All of these things are okay. You just need to know that you have to have a cue. Going back again, don't require that request initially unless they have strong vocal imitation skills or strong requesting skills. If they have vocal imitation, it's great to have them repeat bathroom when you hear the cue that it's time for them to transition. But if they don't have vocal imitation skills, if they don't have strong requesting skills, be okay with not including this component early on. And then a quick note, if there is anyone out there that has an individual on a 60-minute schedule and you may be stuck or accessing barriers, just remember that if the individual doesn't go after 60 minutes, it's recommended that you try again in another 15 to 30. So don't wait another full hour because the chances for accidents are just going to increase. The next thing you're going to need to figure out and have be part of your plan is the individual going to be in underwear, diaper, or pull-ups? Best option is underwear. We know that's not practical. We know that parents don't have time to do laundry all day. We know that individuals don't have 95 pairs of underwear to rotate throughout the day, and that's fine. We totally get it. I think you need to be practical. I think a good solution or good alternative is if they have to be in a diaper or pull-up, if you could put underwear underneath so it's less cleanup, because it's just going to give the individual an opportunity to contact what should be a more natural type of situation. If you can't have the individual in underwear under a diaper or pull-up, should not be a limitation. I think you just need to know it may take a little bit longer. You may need to change the diaper or the pull-up more frequently, but don't let that be, I can't do this because my individual can't wear underwear. Then you're going to need to talk through or figure out what you need to have in place. Liquid consumption is critical. So the research recommendation is 2 to 4 ounces of fluid per hour. Sometimes you may need more. Preferably this is water. So this may be one of those I need to teach first skills. If you have an individual that doesn't tolerate drinking plain water, perhaps they only drink milk or juice, you just want to be careful with the amount of liquids they're consuming that are not water. Sugary drinks can lead to diarrhea. Too much milk can also lead to a lot of issues. So you just want to be mindful of that. And if you don't have an individual that is consuming water consistently without problem behavior, you may want to spend time just working on that before you even start. You need to know what your cue is going to be for when it's time to go to the bathroom. So it's going to be on the implementer, the parent, the therapist to provide the cue in addition to the timer or the potty watch or the app on the iPhone. So again, younger learner might be time to go potty, or an adult might be you need to go to the bathroom. Another consideration that you can include in your plan is dry checks. I would encourage you to make sure you fully understand the individual's language abilities. If they don't understand the difference between wet and dry, it really isn't going to impact whether or not you do a dry check as part of the protocol. It might just be an extra thing that you don't need right away. Additionally, you also want to consider if you've got an older individual who is spending most of their time in high school or at a work setting, or is even in a group home, these dry checks can be stigmatizing. It may be calling attention to a behavior, unnecessary attention. You've got to consider, where you do it. Can you transition to a place that's private? So dry checks are not critical to success with toilet training. So if you don't want to include it, just don't include it. And then the last piece is everyone sits. Everybody sits, including males, until they are fully toilet trained, having successful urinations and bowel movements in the toilet. Everybody sits. Otherwise, it just leads to a lot of confusion. So what happens when it's time to go? Again, I will say it again and again and again. It's your responsibility to give the cue, but you don't want to ask them. You don't want to say, do you need to go potty? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Should we go? You want to give them that clear directive, time to go potty, time to go to the bathroom. Make sure you're transitioning immediately. So don't wait until whatever you're doing is finished. If you're running an in-home program and you want to finish those last, 5 matching trials, don't do it. Stop what you're doing and transition immediately. Again, don't focus on removal of clothing. You can assist and encourage those steps as soon as possible. But if you focus on this when they don't have that skill in their repertoire, you're just building this delay and missing an opportunity to have a successful void in the toilet. You're going to want to make sure you have access to some sort of leisure activity while they're seated. So it shouldn't be the most valuable item. It shouldn't be a highly preferred item, but it needs to be something that they really enjoy. So books, videos, magazines, toys, whatever it is that can kind of occupy their time while they're sitting for these long periods of time. Reinforce immediately with your selected reinforcers only if they go to the bathroom. For older individuals, you may be able to differentiate right away. So if they independently say, I need to go to the bathroom, when they hear that cue for the timer, you may have a greater reinforcer. Or if they can take their pants on and off, you may provide additional reinforcement for completing that step. For older individuals, you should know and feel that you can differentiate based on these additional steps that they're able to complete on their own. And then immediately get up after voiding. No need to sit any longer, up off the toilet, move on with life. If the individual doesn't go, when you sit them on the toilet, no big deal, neutral language, no reinforcer. Again, if you're on that 60-minute schedule, it's recommended that they go again in 15 to 30 minutes so that you're reducing the likelihood of an accident. But what happens if there is an accident? So neutral comments, again, you don't want to be too playful. You don't want to be too punitive. We are talking about toilet training, especially when you become an older adult and you still need support with toileting. It can be pretty hard. And so you want to make sure from the beginning you are respectful of the individual and their disability, and you don't want to be too playful or too punitive. I know sometimes as parents, it's really frustrating if it's the fifth accident of the day, but they're humans and they're trying to learn. And so we are just there to help and facilitate that. You may have consequences for an accident. In terms of consequences, I really, really, really think that it's like anything else. It's really important to try less intrusive measures and reinforcement before you implement some sort of more strict punishment or consequence-based procedure. I feel like if you are at that point, I highly recommend consulting with a behavior analyst or other support system if you don't have in-home care, to help you identify what that's actually going to look like. But some examples of consequences, sometimes it helps to have the individual remain in the soiled underwear only if it's urine. Bowel movements, obviously, you would change right away. But if it's just urine, it sometimes is helpful for them to stay in the underwear for the remainder of the interval. So for example, if they're on a 30-minute schedule and they have an accident at minute 20, they stay in the soiled underwear until for another 10 additional minutes. This may just help their ability in recognizing when they're wet and feeling of discomfort. So in terms of the intensive toilet training protocol, I just want to quickly talk through it so you guys understand the difference between this and a more comprehensive protocol that may move at a slower pace. I think intensive toilet training protocols are more of a quicker way to get an individual toilet trained, although not less easy, certainly not 7 easy steps. I think the main thing is you need to know that this requires your 100% time, effort, energy, resources. This typically follows a set of dense procedures, increasing fluid intake, increasing frequent trips to the bathroom. It's only effective if the individual is in underwear. Example of the schedule is 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off for a 2 to 3 consecutive day period. So that means from the moment the individual wakes up to the moment they go to bed, you're following this 15-minute off, 15-minute on schedule all throughout the day. So you're spending a ton of time in the bathroom. It requires the individual to respond to a variety of reinforcers because they're spending essentially so much time in the bathroom. You're going to need to have a bunch of stuff that keeps things novel, exciting, keeps reinforcement high. I would only recommend doing this if the individual meets all the critical prerequisite skills. So if you're still managing some problem behavior or things like that, I wouldn't recommend using this type of method. This, like I said, it requires the full devotion of the implementer for a 2 to 3 day period, and it may be over a series of these chunks of times. So, oftentimes I have parents do it over a weekend. If it's an in-home service provider implementing this, parents, caregivers, you should know that this is certainly going to take priority over a lot of the skill acquisition goals because there's just so much time being spent in the bathroom, transitioning to the bathroom. So you need to make sure that you only consider this option if you have the time and energy to following through. Data collection and criteria equally as important. If you're a caregiver doing this on your own, it doesn't need to be anything fancy, but like anything else, you need a way to track and make sure if what you're doing is successful. Some of the most common things to track are frequency of accidents, frequency of successful urinations in the toilet. If you are looking at independent requests, you may track the number of times they independently request or go when their timer goes off versus the number of times that they're prompted to go. Using the number 3 as your decision maker can certainly be helpful. So example, 3 successful days in a row, or 3 successes in a row, I'm sorry, within the same day. So they go to the bathroom, they void in the toilet, they don't have accidents for 3 successful opportunities in a row. You may increase that time interval by 5 minutes within the same day. Other option would be if you've got 3 successful days without accidents, then you increase the interval, and that is just going to depend on the individual and how they're responding. So unfortunately, I don't have any good rules for data collection and when to increase. It's going to be based on the individual. And like anything else, you need to make sure you've got your plans or thoughts about how you're going to fade reinforcement, how you're going to fade these unnecessary or unnatural cues, etc. And I think it's also important to remember that older individuals can and should be part of the data collection process. You can do this by having them fill out their own chart, having them, tally the number of times they had successful voids in the toilet, things like that. So the next few slides, I just want to talk through, because it's a lot of information. I want to talk through just some sample protocols for individuals at different ages. So this is putting everything together. So I've done my pre-skills assessment. I've identified what the individual can and cannot do. So if I'm working with an 18-month-old, or say this is my own child perhaps, and I just need a place to get started, I'm going to start with just this increasing their willingness to transition to the bathroom. So no expectations to void, no expectations to wash hands, anything else. I'm going to use my own timer. I'm just going to follow natural routines. So for example, it might be when this individual first wakes up, and then before they go down for a nap, and then right before bed, I'm having this individual go to the bathroom and sit on the toilet. My cue is going to be it's potty time, because the individual is only 18 months old. They're going to remain in diapers because I don't have any expectations to void. So I'm going to keep the individual in diapers because I'm just working on building a routine. I'm going to reinforce successful transitions with social praise. I'm going to provide access to books or toys while they're seated. And I'm going to keep my time interval small. I might use a 10-second countdown if they visually are able to attend to you, or it might be, singing a song together, a single song. And when that song is over, they get up. Something that helps them identify how long they're actually sitting for. No expectations to pull pants up or down. I'm going to change the diaper often so that it reduces the amount of time they're spending in wet diapers, because it's just not natural. So if I am doing this, one of the things that I can do that I have control of is changing the diaper often. And again, no expectations. I'm going to use my clear and consistent language. I'm going to label parts of the routine, but I just want to make them part of the process. I want to start establishing a routine. The next is a sample protocol for a 4-year-old. So let's say that this 4-year-old has significant language delays and is in a special education classroom in the school setting. I'm definitely going to have this individual in underwear. It's just going to increase my effectiveness. They're already 4. We know our general norm is this like 3 to 4 year range. So underwear is really just going to set everybody up to be successful. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting those 2 to 4 ounces of water per hour. My schedule, based on what I've found out prior to starting, is going to be 20 minutes off the toilet and 5 minutes sitting on the toilet. And that just runs consistently throughout the day. I'm going to implement my own cue. So I'm going to use my own personal timer. The difference is that this individual is already consistently requesting for their basic wants and needs using PECs. So I'm going to add in the component of having them exchange the picture icon for the bathroom, but I'm going to use most to least prompting, meaning that initial steps, as soon as my cue goes off, I'm going to physically take my hand, put it on theirs, pick up the icon, put it in my hand, and then I'm going to label, you need to go potty, or bathroom, or whatever cue you want to use, but I'm going to have that included early on in the plan. If an accident occurs, I'm going to immediately transition this individual to the bathroom to sit on the toilet for 5 minutes. They already are experiencing discomfort when they're wet. So the best plan for this individual I've identified is if they're wet, I'm immediately transitioning them to the bathroom to sit for 5 minutes, and no reinforcer is delivered during this time. I'm still going to reinforce successful voids in the toilet with my best reinforcer. I'm not going to do dry checks. This individual has severe language delays, so he doesn't know the difference. He or she doesn't know the difference between wet versus dry. So dry checks are just an additional component to kind of check the box, but may not be effective. So too much to add in the beginning, I'm not going to include it. So hopefully within 1 month, you're going to have less accidents and you're going to be able to increase duration off the toilet, meaning 20 minutes off goes up to 25 minutes off, goes up to 30 minutes off. Last sample protocol would be for a teenager or young adult. So because this individual is bigger, because they are likely to just naturally produce more amounts of urine at a time, I'm going to have this individual in underwear with a diaper on top. Remember, these are all hypothetical. I'm just giving you sample scenarios of how I might put something together. Liquid consumption is going to be increased, no different. I'm going to make sure they're getting at least the 2 to 4 ounces per hour. They're going to be on a less dense schedule. So they're going to be 30 minutes off, 10 minutes on. This individual is going to be given an app on their iPhone. They've got their own personal phone. So I'm going to download an app and I'm going to set the timer, and that's going to be their signal for when they go to the bathroom. This individual has their phone on them at all times. So we're going to already start building in part of the independence by having that app on their iPhone. However, I'm going to be there so that when I hear the cue, I'm going to give that vocal prompt. I need to pee. Hopefully, if this individual has good vocal imitation skills, they're going to repeat, I need to pee. If not, no big deal. You work on it later. The individual does have the ability to pull their pants up and down. So I'm going to include that early on. I'm going to have that be part of the routine, especially because I already know they can go 30 minutes without having an accident. So you've got some time there. While seated on the toilet, same thing applies. Access to books, magazine, phone, whatever that allows them to sit for those longer periods of time. And then successful voids are going to earn access to a highly preferred edible item and perhaps a small amount of money that gets to be exchanged at the end of the week when the caregivers go to the grocery store. Another component is if an accident occurred, this individual is going to remain in their underwear until the interval is over, and they're going to be required to put their soiled underwear in the laundry and then get out their own clean underwear and put them on. I am going to do dry checks. Perhaps you're doing this in a home setting, so you have the ability to do it. The individual understands wet versus dry, when they are wet versus dry. So that's something you're going to include, and you would want to make sure that you are reinforcing if you do catch dry underwear in the middle of that 30-minute time interval. Another component I'm going to include for this older learner is I'm going to have them color in a box on a chart to indicate successful voids. So I'm going to make them part of the process. I'm going to make them part of the data collection process. And then last, because time is not on our side, because we do have an older individual that is not yet toilet trained, I'm going to reinforce any independent approaches towards the bathroom. So say, for example, the individual just starts walking towards the bathroom. I may use some body positioning, blocking, and be like, you need to pee, and block them and see if I can get them into the bathroom and just reinforce just those approximations or attempts to move towards the bathroom, just to see if that additional reinforcement helps expedite the process. So I've given you a ton of information. You may feel overwhelmed. That's okay. It's like I said, I like one of my goals today is to really emphasize that toilet training is not easy, and the most effective plans are going to really have all of these components, and you're really going to take the time to figure out all of these different things so that you come up with a strong plan that requires less modifications over time, more successes quicker. So if you don't know where to start, whether you have a 12-month-old, a 15-year-old, a 25-year-old, things that you can do right now that are physically in your control is making sure that if they're in diapers or pull-ups, you're changing them frequently. So don't let the individual sit in their diaper or pull up wet for extended periods of time. Change it often so they're experiencing this feeling of dry more and more and more frequently. Set a goal for yourself. I want my child or I want my learner to sit for just 2 times a day or 3 times a day, and include it as part of the natural routine. So you don't have to go out of your way to set this up. Do it, when the individual first wakes up, or before lunch, or right before bed, whatever is naturally occurring throughout the day. And the last is make sure you're ready to reinforce any successful attempts. I think one of the things that we do is when we start establishing these routines, we don't see things happen right away. We don't see successful voids happen right away. And then they do. And then you're not prepared to reinforce it. So if you do start this, I highly recommend having something in the bathroom, your reinforcer in the bathroom, so that it's ready to go if you do get the opportunity to reinforce a successful void in the toilet. So in summary, some takeaway points. What I hope that you walk away with from today is you need to know that effective toilet training really shouldn't take more than a year if you do all the proper planning to set yourself up to be successful. If you are in that position, seek consultation from a professional. There's many of us in the area that would love to help, and so certainly reach out to a professional and seek help if this applies to you and you want the support. Know that you can and should begin toilet training at any age. If you've got a 12-month-old, 14-month-old, start by establishing the routine, but it's also never too late. If you have an 18-year-old and you feel like you're at the same place you were when they were 12 months old, start with some of those basic things I talked about, making sure they're wet or they're dry more often, making sure that they have this minimum amount of times that they're sitting on the toilet, just to establish the routine and get you both started and moving in the right direction. I hope you know by this point, it's going to take time. It's going to take patience and planning. Advice from your friends, I think as parents, as analysts, as just anybody, we get a lot of unsolicited advice. And so I just want to, especially with toilet training, if you're talking to family members about this or talking to your friends about this, I just want you to make sure that, you need to know in your mind what works for you and what works for your child, or if you're an analyst, what works for your specific client. I think that there's just so much around, the use of iPhone and iPad screen time, the use of fruit snacks. And the reality is you really need to do what works best for you and what works best for that individual. And if you want to get stuck on somebody's opinion about whether or not an iPad is considered screen time and is considered a bad thing, to get, a 17-year-old at a place where they can go to the bathroom on their own without mom or dad's support, I just encourage you to kind of make sure you feel strongly about what you're doing and know that the goal is that these things aren't in place forever. But the reality is, if you need to keep an iPad and a fruit snack in place, and that is what allows your 25-year-old to go to the bathroom on their own, or your 7-year-old to go to the bathroom on their own, those are really small components in the big picture of life. So just be mindful of that, especially if you're talking to friends or parents or other providers about what you're doing for specific toilet training protocols. The other thing is making sure you're doing one thing at a time. I think a lot of times we're quick to say, none of this is working, so let's take all of it out and try all these new things. And it's just going to become a barrier. It's going to make the process longer. So make sure you're just looking at one small piece at a time. I want to remind you that these are really general components. I think we've talked through prerequisites. We've talked through some of the major components in an effective toilet training protocol. But again, you could individualize all day long for your specific child or learner. So just walk away knowing that. And last, we are having the part 2 coming in January, and I'm sure Neil will reference that again, or you'll see the link to register. But part 2 is going to focus on nighttime toilet training, wiping, and bowel movements. So that's it. I think we've got some time at the end for questions.
I'm tuning back in, getting all my audio back on. That was great. Thank you so much, Brittany. I did put the link to the second presentation, which is January 13th from 2 to 3. So make sure you sign up for that. You can just follow the link in the chat. That'll get you right to our registration. Feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box. One of the questions that came in was, with the pandemic, so many services are going virtual. What about something like, do you think of like a virtual toileting program? Is that something that can help? Are people providing that? Is that something that's being done now?
I think in a pandemic, I feel like we're all in the same position where, anything can goes if it works well. So I wouldn't not begin if your only access to support is virtually. I think that you just need to know that it's probably going to take a little bit of additional time, whether it's for the analyst to identify exactly what needs to happen, multiple observations. Know that the implementer is going to rely a lot on you as the parent or caregiver, because you're going to need to make sure you're fully trained and able to do this without the support of direct care staff. So it's just one of those things where if you think you have the ability and the bandwidth to do it, it wouldn't hurt to start.
Great. What about the sensory piece of it? How can you do some things to like, I know that's a big piece of it sometimes for some kids and some young adults. How do you sort of counter that? How do you help with that?
It's kind of a big question, depending on what type of sensory need you're talking about, whether it's flushing or sensitivity to the feeling of the toilet or the urination even coming out. Sometimes our individuals have reactions with that. So again, I think it's one of those things, figure out exactly what that issue is, and then figure out if it's something that you need to take time to pre-teach, or if you can include it. So if the individual has difficulty with hearing the sound of the toilet flush, you may want to run a desensitization program where after they're consistently in the bathroom and complying, maybe it's a quick flush and they run out of the bathroom so they don't have to hear the whole thing. If it's issues with the way the toilet feels on their skin, there's a lot of things you can do, such as getting different types of potty seats or lining the toilet with toilet paper. And just know that eventually you're going to want to do your best to try to get rid of those things. But I think it all comes with desensitizing and increasing their ability to tolerate those things.
Right.
Because unfortunately, when they grow up and go out into the real world, they're not going to have access to that stuff in public restrooms.
I'm trying to turn off. I'm doing this webinar.
Okay. I don't have any questions coming in through the chat box. If you have any, feel free. You can send them over to me and I can forward them on to Brittany to get those questions answered. Again, we have recorded this podcast and this webinar, and we're going to share it tomorrow with you all, along with a survey. So if you get a chance to fill out the survey, please do that. In the chat box, I just put the link to our online resource fair, where Trish and myself and Shelly are going to be on talking about some of the resources that we have. And you can find some of the other workshops we have coming up. But that second part of the potty training, toilet training workshop for adolescents and children is going to be coming up on January 13th. So thank you so much, Brittany, for your time.
You're welcome.
You did a great job. This has been in a planning stage for a long time, and you guys are great to work with. Behavioral framework, great partner of ours, really very generous. So thank you so much for all you guys do for Pathfinders. We really do appreciate it. So thank you so much. And everybody have a great rest of your Wednesday and take care of each other. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Brittany.